Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 11. Today's guest is a producer, director, animator, and designer. He has won over 250 major awards for his work, and he's worked for a number of animation studios, including DePatie-Freleng, Jay Ward, Pantomime Pictures, Ed Graham Productions, Format Films, and for his own company, Kurtz & Friends. It was his work on the Pink Panther for DePatie-Freleng that I originally contacted Bob for my book, Think Pink, the DePatie-Freleng Story, which was released in 2016 from Bear Manor Media. And then I interviewed him again for my book, Alvin, the Story of Ross Bagdasarian Jr., Liberty Records, Format Films, and The Alvin Show, which is available now for pre-order on www.bearmanormedia.com and soon to be released in February or March of 2019. Here he is, Bob Kurtz. Basically, I wanted to know, we talked before with DePatie-Freleng, but looking on IMDb, is this your first job? Professional job? Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I worked at Disney. My first job was Disney, doing experimental films, storyboard and writing, and actually directing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't list that type of stuff, but it's like...
No, well, the film was never finished.
Oh, which film was it?
It was stopped before it was finished, so it's an incomplete... I'm in the book of... there's a Disney book on unfinished projects.
Yeah, I have that. So...
Yeah, well, I'm in it.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll have to look at it again. Which one was it?
Oh, it's called The Emperor's Nightingale.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. And they had a picture of Mickey in there. Did you do one of those layouts or drawings? Okay, got it. Okay. Just curious because it's like, it's fine if the Alvin Show was the first thing, but, Disney's even better. So
yeah, no, I started on my teacher, Teehee, who later became my partner, brought me to Disney and gave me great opportunities. And then he's actually the one that was responsible for me going to work at Format Films.
Oh, okay.
So when I left, because he kind of arranged it. I already had a job when I left, and he made me go interview with Herb Klin. But anyway, go ahead. Go ahead and ask your questions.
Okay, so you never worked at UPA then, right?
No, I didn't.
Okay, all right. No, I am asking the question. That was my first question. So the Alvin Show was the first job. But anyway, on working on the Alvin Show, you designed the characters. Which characters did you design? Just the Chipmunks and David Seville, or did you design others?
Yeah, well, that was basically it. Later on, there are probably some incidental ones, but it was just that, not quite Crash Cup.
Okay.
I didn't do that.
So
That was Leo Salkin.
Oh, okay. And Leonardo, too, the little silent partner. Okay. Now, how did that work? Was it the same people working on both Alvin and the Chipmunks, I guess, and on Crash Cup, or was it split up between two teams or three teams even, or how'd that work?
Okay. Let me just answer you one question so you know where I'm coming from, okay?
Okay.
And then I can answer all those.
Okay.
Because I started thinking about, I'm going to be talking to you, and I realized that you have Joe Siracusa, the editor, who had, he's wonderful and had so many experiences.
Right.
When I got hired before the show came on at Format Films, I was hired as a writer and I did storyboards. And I think the unique thing is Leo Salkin is the one who did the original storyboard and was really the overseer and worked real closely with Ross Bagdasarian.
Okay.
The movers of the company were Herb Klin and Leo took over that project. Now, when I came there, I'm in a very unique position. I was a writer. I worked on all aspects of the show. I was present when the show was sold to the networks. I was Leo's right-hand man for story editing of freelance writers. So basically, And of course, I worked with animators. I worked with all the directors, and I don't think I'm not sure, but I think I'm the only one that wrote on all aspects of the show, because most of the time it did get people had specialties. A few people slipped over. Might have been somebody who did an Alvin and a Clyde Crash Cup, but I did them all. I did a lot. So just so you know, and when we asking questions, I can tell you a lot. I realized, oh my God, it's kind of scary. I think there's Alan Zasloff, but I don't know if he, Kentucky's one of the animators. But if you look at the credits, not all the credits are on the show. Because I looked up, I thought, IBM, or whatever it's called. And I looked it up, and it had freelance credits and on the equal level of the staff credits, and it didn't have a lot of the staff writers.
Right.
So it's all mixed up as to who really worked there, who didn't, who came in on one job, all that. So I'm just letting you know. From almost, it's kind of unique. I didn't realize it, but I sort of worked on so many aspects. I'm probably the only one. I hate to say it, because it's scary. I don't feel that old. I'm on the left who knows
everything.
So I know everything about the show, and I worked very close with Ross Bagdasarian, because I was constantly working with him, and there were a lot of stories and a lot of stuff. So because I was one of the young writers, and he liked working with me, so we would talk a lot. He was a very, very strong, opinionated, and really a pleasure to work with, but very, very opinionated, which was great. He had his own viewpoint on what he wanted.
And that was one of my questions, is like, how involved was Ross Bagdasarian? It sounds like he's very hands-on, very accessible.
He was completely involved on all the story meetings. We presented to Ross. That's who signed off on the show, and he was there constantly. He was a force. He had a lot of energy. He controlled the tracks. And I was when they recorded. We were never around when they recorded. They recorded off the premises. So the recording aspects I know nothing about, other than what Ross would tell me. But that wasn't done here. The studio was pretty large. I didn't have the camera there, and the final editing was there. But I think, for sound design and for things that they did, I didn't see it. Though I would see many of the voice talents came in and talked to us. So June Foray, Shep Menken, those kind of people. I would talk with, and it's kind of amazing. I thought, I hate to tell you, but I got hours of stories because I was there.
Yeah. So, any little chestnut, if you give me the majority of the stories, there usually is one narrative that kind of carries the whole thing, and if that's you, then here we are.
Well, okay, no, I just to give you, from where I think it's best I tell you where I'm coming from, which is it was really fascinating, but it was format was my second job, and I had a great time working on the show and a lot of freedom. Anyway, so from there, go ahead, ask your questions.
Okay.
I just wanted to let you know. Okay.
Well, some questions are just kind of silly. I could just look them up, but I just kind of want to know. It's like, where was Format Films? I know in Southern California, Los Angeles, but where was it located? Do you remember?
It was on Laurel Canyon Boulevard, and it's in I guess is that called North Hollywood?
Okay.
It was a block above the freeway 134.
Okay.
So whatever, I'm not sure what place it was, but it's a two-story building, a big space. basically for at that time for an animation studio.
And did you do everything in-house, including the voice recordings, or was that done? You said it was done elsewhere?
No, the voice was recorded somewhere else.
Okay. Do you think it might have been Monarch? I think that's where a lot of the Chipmunks things, at least the record versions, were Monarch Studios. Does that sound right?
I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know.
Okay.
I know he was Ross was very he was like secretive on how he got, how he recorded fast.
Right.
That was his pride. He really was really happy with how he was able to do it. And he used to tell me that Disney wanted to know how he did it because in his words, his Chippendale, Disney's Chippendale wasn't as good as his. But that was Ross talking.
Well, I'll tend to agree with him. I mean, it's like, I think the secret I always thought is that he spoke slower.
Oh, of course, he had to speak very slower, and then with accents. But yeah, that's what they did. They sped it up, 3 times. Yeah, I mean that's what they did.
Yeah. Whereas Chippendale, they just spoke normally and sped it up, so he was like, blah, 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 blah. It was too fast.
Yeah. I think it was just it's like he had Ross Bagdasarian, as you know, probably he did Come On to My House, Come On, which was his, and he was really proud of his Armenian heritage, and he and his cousin William Saroyan were very close, and he brought William Saroyan to the studio.
Oh, okay. So how are they're cousins, you said? Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
They were cousins. In fact, very early on, I don't know if it was in the 40s, it was a long time ago, but I think Saroyan had written, I can't remember what the play was, very famous play, and I can't remember offhand, but they drove across country, Ross and William, and they made up the character. He wasn't named Clyde Crashka, but they made up a character who invented things that were already invented. And that's where it came from. It was their kind of wordplay as they went across the country and entertained themselves. So it came from that.
Okay.
So that, the idea.
How about the design of those characters, or even on the Chipmunk characters? How did those...
Well, the Chipmunk characters, how it came is originally with the big long. I'm not sure if it came. They had them in the records that preceded it, but Leo Salkin did the first rough drawings, or no, they're not that rough, but I mean he did storyboards with the characters, and they don't look anything like what what we know them to be, but they were great drawings. And when he had done it, so then when we and I'd been there when I did the presentation, as I said before. So when we were starting to design the show, I did my own variation off of what Leo had done.
Okay.
And we're drawing, and what was happening was that Herb Quinn, again, is very knowledgeable, but what he was doing, he was bringing in character designers, and what he was trying to do is control Ross, and Ross is not controllable. I mean, he's just not. So what he would say, he constantly said to Ross, well, this guy's got 10 years experience, and this guy's got 15 years experience. And Ross would say anything, and he'd just say, I don't care if he's got experience, these drawings suck.
Yeah.
And he would just go, because I was in meetings with him constantly with Ross, so he didn't care. He just would say what he was on his mind. So as he was passing my desk, and he saw me doing the storyboards, one of the early storyboards on the Chipmunks section, and he said, and I think he had just made the presentation, Herb, and he had gotten really mad, and so then he looked at my drawings, and of course I'm the kid of the group, and he said, why can't they look like this? So then, and there were about 6 people around, including Ross's brother-in-law was like a producer or somehow in the company, in Ross's company, and a whole bunch of other people, and they were just a lot of people around me, which was kind of, it was imposing. And they said, yeah. And so Herb said, go ahead, draw them. So I sat down with them. I mean, I was sitting down already, with them leaning over me, which I do not like. No artist likes that. I drew each chipmunk, and David Sebille did one drawing, and I did it directly. They whipped it out of my hands.
Yeah.
And they copied him because they were in scale, and they handed out that. It wasn't even a model sheet. They handed that out as that's where the chipmunks were, because when I finished it, Ross said, that's it. That's what I want.
Now, how tight was that sketch? Was it like a rough sketch, or is it like a fully realized?
It was pretty clean.
What?
It was pretty clean.
Oh, okay.
But it was only in one position. Each character was only in one position. In fact, what happened, it was a strange Rudy LaRiva when he got it, because I thought, well, somebody will do turnarounds or do, something. All he did is he copied it, reversed the copy, and they just referred to it looking left and looking right. It was real strange at the beginning. I thought, they got to do more than that. But then I think somewhere along the line with other people drawing it, it got developed, along with the fact that I was drawing it, other people were drawing it, but that was then the model, and it came from just pointing, do it now.
Okay.
So that's how I ended up designing it. It wasn't it's not normally how you're told to design a character.
So there was never any directive for or against. I mean, you've seen earlier Chipmunks prior to the show, right? That they look really realistic on the album covers, and then there were some puppets on Ed Sullivan's show where Ross was on there. The puppets were designed by Bob Clampett, and just variations that look more realistic, I would say, than the cartoony versions you came up with. Was that a conscious effort?
I'm sorry, what?
Was that a conscious effort to say, let's make them more cartoony?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, because first of all, Leo Salkin's drawings were much more, they were in the cartoon realm. They were, they were those kind of shapes. And, I mean, I took, I kept the relative proportions, but drew them that way. And as an aside, I ended up not only doing all these different things I did, but I did the album for Golden Books. Ross came to me, and I did one Golden Book on Alvin called Alvin's Lost Voice, and another one for Clyde Crash Cup. So I did the books for him, along with he wanted to sell a comic strip. So I inked the original thing, but he couldn't sell the comic strip. So I mean, he would come to me for extra work. That was outside the studio realm. In other words, well, you do the Golden Books. And I said, well, I hadn't ever done it before, but sure, why not? I mean, that's a nice compliment.
Yes. Did you work on the comic book at all? The one published by Dell that was called Alvin? Okay.
No, I didn't do any of that. The stuff I did, I wrote and illustrated, but no, I didn't do that.
And then did you do drawings for like the promotional stuff? Like there's little records that they did, like the album covers and stuff like that.
Well, occasionally I think I roughed out stuff for them, and then they'd have other artists, come in and paint or whatever. But at times they would ask me to do things. Yeah. Got
it. Okay. And as a company overall, I guess this is just kind of expanding out a little bit. What was Format Films like? I mean, like in you could say in comparison to say Disney or DePatie-Freleng or anywhere else you've worked. How did it work?
Well, it was very artist friendly. Part of it was that Herb had been a really good background painter before they had him as a production manager, and then as he became a producer, he had an artistic sense, and his partner, I think it was the minor partner was Jules Engel,
right.
And of course, so you had two artists running the studio, and Buddy Getzler. I don't know what his relationship was, but he was like the business guy, so he was always sour. But there was a lot of wonderful to me, there's a very spirited group of people. They had some really, really good writers, had good animators. What I think is fascinating, they had the first, a good friend of mine, Frank Braxton, was the first black animator in American animation. And besides that, he also was a wonderful musician. And they had a lot of good musicians. Besides artists, so at lunchtime they would play jazz. You'd bring your brown bag, and there was a little jazz group playing at lunchtime. And Frank would play constantly. He played guitar, so he would play these at break. He'd play for me. But they had what I think is fascinating. At early a time, like Frank came way before they ever hired anybody at Disney. And by the time they were doing the show, they had two black animators working on the show, which I didn't know that Frank was the first black animator. He just was a good friend, and I thought they had to be black animators somewhere working. It turned out there weren't. But it's just a lot of really good talent and good-spirited people. When we go, if you want to talk, we can talk different artists, and I can tell you about them.
Okay.
But a lot of talent. So my memory was it was a really good place to work. You had the friction between Ross and the company, because Ross wasn't going to settle for anything. So you had this constant conflict where Herb was trying to appease him, or trying to tell him, oh, well, and we do this, or we do that, and Ross wanted what he wanted.
Right.
And that's pretty much it. And he, I'm sure he was a headache to Herb, but I would say there was really a good spirit, a really great spirit, actually, when I think about him.
Is that a reason? Is that a reason why? Is that a reason why there's only 26 episodes one season, or no?
Oh, I don't know what. No, it was rare that they had that animation went prime time.
Right.
It was a very rare thing. I have no idea. That's a network's decision.
Okay.
Why to cut something, we would never know. I mean, though in the first meeting, I knew they liked it, and the agency that represented format was there and all that, and that went really, really well. But after why it was, it only went that long, I can't really say.
Okay. Because it always baffles me. It's like they did the one season in prime time, and then it moved to Saturday mornings, and instead of doing a few more or any more, it's like it just was repeats over and over and over. So I started watching them in the early 70s, and it was the same ones. I had no idea they were from 1961. They were new to me, and it's like, I found out later, that, wow, not only is that Ross is dead, and, it's like, wow, I didn't know that, because he died in 72. So that's why I was like, wow, these things are really old, but they didn't seem so fresh. And why didn't they do more? But they eventually did, of course, later on with, the sun and everything, but that's a whole nother story.
It's still going on,
Yeah, and all the different versions they do now. They have a CGI version now, and they've had the live-action version and all that stuff, but...
Yeah, I know. I know people who worked on the later shows with Ross Jr. and other, and basically it was a happier place with Ross Sr. That's all I could say.
Okay.
The other one is because I didn't work there, but you got the feeling people did not enjoy that much working there, or a lot of people didn't. Now, there must be a percentage that did like it. And maybe looking back, if people left, format, there might have been people going on, the same thing, but I wasn't aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the people I worked with really had a good time.
Mm-hmm. Now, you just worked on Alvin's show at Format, or did you also work on, like, the movie titles, TV titles, and other stuff?
I worked on a lot of stuff. I did a lot of commercials for him when I first came in.
Okay.
I don't remember doing movie titles because when the show was over, I moved on.
Okay.
So I wasn't there after when the show left. I left. I mean, when they were through with the show.
With the Alvin show, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't. Well, let's say I may have. Trying to remember because I worked on industrial films. I co-authored one of the industrial films with Leo Salkin. I'm trying to think. I think pretty much. I might have come back once, but I was working basically as a writer, but I wasn't around when they did The Lone Ranger or some of the other shows.
Yeah.
That was long gone.
I didn't see your name on that, so I was just curious.
No, I was long gone.
But one that seemed contemporary with Alvin's show, there's some TV titles, and I wrote it down, for shows that I don't even know about. One Happy Family and The Hathaways, two different shows. Do those ring a bell at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, there was something from TV spots, and I can't remember. It was like the Colonel and something else.
Like Calvin and the Calvin and the Colonel?
Yeah, Calvin and the Colonel. I remember that.
Okay.
And there was something with Get Smart. I think that was either Super Dog or
there's Tennessee Tuxedo.
Tennessee Tuxedo, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, again, the budgets were not very big, and the time pressures were pretty strong, in terms of trying to get the work out. So even though it was prime time, it didn't have big budgets. So they were always struggling. It's the same thing Jay Ward went through, and I worked for Jay Ward, and they didn't have. They often, they were budget deprived.
Well,
so often when someone looks at it and says, well, they don't have much animation. Well, they didn't have much time to do it. It was like they really knocked out the footage.
Yeah. Well, I know that whole story on the other side because I did a total television book. And so, that is Tennessee Tuxedo and Underdog, but that was all the New York guys. They didn't cross over.
That's right.
Except the animation studio was in Mexico, the Gama Productions. So
that's right, and I knew directors who had gone down there. So when they were doing it down in Mexico, I mean, they were having their shoes shined at the desk for like 5 cents, and they'd have one foot up while they're drawing, and like, because I worked on Roger Ramjet, so Jay Ward, they often put scenes out of sync, flares, anything goes. There's no such thing as a reshoot. The stuff was done. It was brilliantly written and smartly animated. But you couldn't. I mean, you're kind of amazed because I did a lot of, when I came back, and I've done a lot of commercials and public service spots with Jay Ward characters, which I redesigned, and I was always surprised when I come back and I go study. I want to be true to the source, and I realized there's no sound effects. There's hardly anything. They're bare bones because when I'm doing it, I'm filling it with there's a kind of a choreography of sound and things going on. They would just be dialogue and occasionally an explosion.
Right.
There was never music. There was never transitions. It's kind of funny, but it was so much fun. And it was so nicely, dumb and fun, and great writers, great designers. I mean, the people again on the Jay Ward show were amazing. I mean, they're the best, best in the business. And I think at its time they had some superb talent on Alvin the Chipmunk, the original one. They really had some good talent.
Now, did you also, and the answer is probably yes, they did little Chipmunks ads for Jello and everything as a sponsor and stuff. Did you do all that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Those are mine. Actually, that's an interesting story. I did the Jello commercial, 60-second Jello commercial, and I wrote it, and because I do something for Jello, so I did my board. Now, if you look at the Jello commercial, it's the truest of the way I draw was done in film, and that was Bob Cannon. Bob Cannon, who was a marvelous director, animator from UPA, just brilliant man. I mean, really one of the legends of animation. And he used to come by and visit, and because he was kind of, he was kind of freelancing, not doing a whole lot. And so they came in and they said, when I was given it, do a Jello commercial. So I drew it up, and then they said, we're going to have Bob Cannon animate it. I said, oh, great, And so he went and animated, and particularly the Jello's moving all around, and he's doing this stuff. I mean, for its time, it's brilliant, and it's brilliant anyway. You can see it on YouTube.
Right.
But it's the only time that my characters are drawn the way, because I did the layouts, and he was true to my layouts, because they used to kind of square them off. I have curves, I had stuff. So if you want to know what the Chipmunks really look like, it's that Jello commercial.
Okay, because I noticed they look slightly different than on the show, and so that explains it. So
that's the original design.
Okay.
That's the design. That's the stuff they're supposed to be drawing.
Right.
Is that only it takes skill. Because. I mean, I didn't. There was when Hanna-Barbera's around, you draw stuff so it's so easy that anybody can draw it and they can knock out their footage. I didn't draw because when they asked me to do it, I didn't draw it so they could knock out their footage. So as they did it, they found a way to get it simpler and simpler so they could knock out the footage. But Bob Cannon just could animate up gorgeous because there's when the Jello's moving, I indicated it, and he's got Alvin doing all the distortion behind it. That's so good. That's pure Bob. I mean, I think I probably did a drawing, but I never thought it'd look like that. When I thought, oh my God, I look, my work looks brilliant when done by Bob Cannon. I mean, it's like, whoa. You can tell I'm still excited about that.
Now, I've never seen all the shows uncut. Obviously, I've seen most of them in reruns or even on DVD. Did you have a different commercial for each episode, or did they repeat them?
Oh, you mean the Jello?
Yeah, or anything.
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember because that was completely separate. No, they had a series. I think they only did one Jello commercial.
Okay.
And I didn't. I mean, most of the time it was just regular commercials went on in between.
And I think there were a couple other Chipmunk commercials, if I remember correctly. I should have checked. But
I only did one.
Oh, okay.
So therefore I don't remember.
Okay, but I know there was product placement for Soaky the Fun Bath, but I don't know if they did an animated commercial for that. I'm trying to think.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But
I can tell you one flaw in the system, and it used to drive the writers crazy, was we would go through and each writer would go and present his storyboard to Ross, Herb, a couple other people. There'd be about 4 or 5 because there's always a group around Ross. And so we would make we would do the storyboard presentation. With that, then someone would come in and unpin the board and put it in order and go away. The director was never present in the presentation. It was taken to the director, and I remember thinking it was an awful system that the director's not present in the presentation, and they would go off and they would plus it. I don't know if you know the word plus.
Not sure.
It would add something to it.
Oh.
Not understanding what the essence of a gag or a situation or a staging or a story point. They didn't get it. So Cal Howard, one of the great comedy gag men, and Teehee and I shared, at one point we were all in one big room, but it got so, I'm going to wander off, but it got so noisy because they had the editorial next door, which Joe Syracuse remembers, because while they were doing Alvin the Chipmunks show, Jack Kinney, who used to work at Disney, had Popeye. They were doing Popeye cartoons. So while they're cutting it, while we're writing and trying to hear, and it's next door and it's really loud, they go, Olive Oil would say, "Oh, Popeye, please save me." This would go on and on. It was just over and over. "Oh, Popeye, please save me," in this false voice, going fucking crazy. So at one point, I'd like to say, some of the TV animators the best, but Teehee, Cal Howard, Dick Shaw, who was, originally wrote the Magoos, wonderful, crazy man. We were moved out of the writers group that was there and put in a separate building, and we were like supposedly the cream of the crop. So we were put off by ourselves. So often on, I think it was Monday night, whatever night the Alvin the Chipmunk show would come, we'd get together and we watch the show, and it's like probably writer's remorse, but every show, because we never saw anything until it went on air. We were never included in the process of making, which is, nobody does that. They don't even do it today in a rush, I don't think. That the director and the writer don't get together. And so we always, the show could have been so much better, because every episode, at least the group I knew that worked on it, we were just moaning and groaning because they just didn't get it, because they were not in the room. I don't remember how long it took us to write a story. Maybe when I was doing Pink Panthers, I only had 2 weeks, so I think I was probably in the 2-week syndrome. I got used to, you probably knock out a story in a couple weeks.
Yeah. And nobody, out of all those episodes, nobody suggested to do it differently? They just did it the same way the whole entire time?
No, they were in a rush, but it was a stupid rush. Everything was a rush. The idea that you would come and, I think sometimes I did unpin my own board, but you just put it in a pile. And then Dick Shaw, who was, first of all, Cal Howard was the funniest man I've ever seen deliver a board. So he would do the board, and of course, he could make you laugh at anything. So, but fortunately, he was very, very funny. And the thing that was unique, Cal was brilliant. A brilliant gag man. But I was trained at Chouinard Art Institute, so I had a fairly contemporary training and drawing and the sense of design. Cal drew like Milk Gross. Do you know who Milk Gross is?
Yeah.
Okay. So when a character runs, every joint it's all awkward, but funny.
Yeah.
When he's running, the thumbs are sticking out. It's just, it's like I'm looking at a drawing that's all long, but so funny. So because I'm drawing, everyone else's drawing is sort of more contemporary of what it is. He's got these outlandish, kind of drawing from the 20s and the 30s that's in the show, maybe 30s. But it was so funny. So I gained great respect for funny drawing. Screw how well it's drawn. Is it a funny drawing? So it was great watching him deliver. And then Dick Shaw he was just kind of like out there floating. He was a great character. And so when you do a storyboard, he did it in layers. So, like if you have drawing 44 or whatever it is, there are 3 drawing 44s, one under another, under another, under another, and they're odd. They're not even the same size paper. And so as he's going through, he's lifting up paper to see what's underneath it as he's delivering it. It was the craziest presentation. They were all brilliant. And we always had, I missed it, Leo Salkin was always in all the story meetings. Because, again, Leo was the force, and Ross totally believed in Leo.
That's good.
And accepted Leo. I mean, I don't think he didn't necessarily believe all in Herb. That doesn't mean Herb wasn't right, but he accepted Leo, whatever it was in his nature. Leo could talk to him, and if there was a problem or something he didn't understand, Leo got it through. So Leo was, if it's anybody's show, it's Leo Salkin's show. I mean, he created a thing. He followed through. He was in every story thing. He always called me Robert, which I never. Everyone else said my name is Bob or Bobby, and he always said Robert. And he said it always kind of correcting me.
Robert.
But he wanted me around him when we met with the freelancers.
Now, when you were doing that show there, I mean, I know, obviously, all these different studios weren't like Hanna-Barbera where they had multiple shows going concurrently, but was there talk of doing either a spin-off show or just totally other shows and nothing ever really happened until the Lone Ranger, or what happened there?
Well, when we were getting close towards the end of the show, Herb came to Teehee, Cal Howard, and me, and wanted us to create another show that they could take to the networks. So they got us a room down the street. We were not supposed to, and we met at night. We were not supposed to let Ross know that we're trying to see what we can bring to it. So we started out doing a special. I don't know why a special, because no one was buying animation specials. But we did a thing called Lock, Stock, and Barrel. It was three characters, Lock, Stock, and Barrel, and it was hysterical. But we got kind of crazed and made a crazy ending to it, which made her choke on him. All of us thought it was hysterical because at the end the villain got the girl. And we thought that was really funny. I still do.
Now was that ever made? Was that ever made?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't know. We finished it. We did the board.
Okay.
And we did do it, and it was so funny because we had to, we worked at night, like I think 5 blocks down the street in a motel. So when we finished our job, we went off to see, to do that, and it was all in secret.
Okay. Because
he didn't want. One, of course, he didn't want to have a run-in with Ross, but I think Ross was getting more and more feeling he could do it himself. He could do, that Herb felt probably was hanging in, just hanging in there because Ross became more and more, I'm going to say, I'm trying to think the right word, but confident of his skills as an animation filmmaker.
Was there ever a time during the production where, like, Ross got so fed up and he was threatening to take the whole thing from format and give it to a different studio or anything like that?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's possible, but he would not do that in the studio's presence.
Okay.
In other words, if it happened, it would have happened behind closed doors.
Okay.
Somebody else might know it.
Okay.
I mean, it's not open knowledge. I mean, anybody could make it up.
Yeah.
And Herb's not around because Herb would have been a very interesting source and a very honest person.
Yeah.
So he would have told you everything.
Yeah. Now, I've talked to Scott Shaw and Mike Cazala, and they've said a few things that they know, probably from talking to you and other people. One question that Scott had, because I asked, I'm going to talk to Bob Kurtz, is there anything I should ask? And he said, did you ever work on a show, or at least was it boarded or anything, of Lost World or Doc Savage? And I go, I've never even heard of cartoon versions of those, so it's like I figured I'd ask.
No.
Okay.
No, never did.
Okay.
No, never did.
Okay.
I'm sort of a cartoon guy, but no, haven't.
Okay.
But I can tell you, there's whenever you want, but different stories about some of the different people.
Yeah.
There, I mean, because they had a great, a great mixture. So there's like, for instance, there's Alan Zasloff, who was Bob Cannon's protege, and he could draw. He worked at UPA, and he was one of the youngest animators. To become an accomplished animator, he was like black belt in karate, very athletic. He's going to be 90, and because I just saw him this weekend, there was a special event for him. But I was going to say he was so fast on animating that he would spend like 4 hours with a big board doing life drawings during the day, and then he would go to animate. And on the opposite side of the desk was Stan Wilkins, who was in the Navy until he was 36, then went to art school for 4 years, was the hardest working guy you ever saw. And he was on one side, because they had the desk back up. One guy was drawing 8 to 9, 10 hours a day, and the other one was drawing 2 to 2.5 hours a day. Because Alan was so good. I mean, Alan eventually ended up teaching. Not eventually. I mean, he did. He produced a lot of Disney shows, and he also taught life drawing at Otis Art Institute because he's an extraordinary draftsman, and of course a marvelous animator. But I mean, there was characters everywhere. Not everybody was a slave at the desk.
And let's see. Well, another person's still around, and I know he's had his own studio, and I never really talked to him before. Fred Wolf.
Well, Fred's a good guy, but Fred freelanced. So I never saw Fred there.
Yeah, because like I said, I just went down the list on IMDb, and it's like.
Oh, I know. I saw that too, and sometimes you wonder. Wait a minute. I don't even remember. I knew. I mean, I haven't seen Fred. I think I've seen him once in 10 years. We saw each other a lot in the 60s. Yeah. And he, during the 60s, he was, when he came out here, he did a lot of work at Hanna-Barbera. And that's where, before he had Murakami Wolf. Right. So it might be, it would be, if you could get a hold of him, but I don't think he was, as far as I know, I'd be so surprised. He was never in the studio. Okay. I mean, he didn't have a desk at the studio. They had people picking up. Right. And that's a different world. You come in, get your stuff, come back, get your footage. I mean, just the same thing. Like they list these writers. And one of the writers, freelance writers, was Chris Jenkins. He was great because I was in all these meetings, and Chris was a great storyboard man. His stuff was so funny, and he came in, and it was just knocked down. It was great. He was the best freelancer. And of course, he was one of the mainstays for Jay Ward when they just started. So Chris was, he was trained in France, and he was extraordinary. Then they had like people who might have been good. I don't want to say their names because, their names are on the list, and it was crazy. They would come in. I tell you, these two guys came in. One was in the process of probably dying from alcoholism, so he had to stand there, and by the way, it's interesting, one would come in a suit, and he would have his hands next to like his, either, I can't say where, if he had a kidney in the front, and he's holding on to it, and he can, and he's in a lot of pain, he's leaning against the wall. That's one writer. That very, very one-time, very good writer, but now, and he's teamed up with this other guy, and this other guy comes in, and he starts telling, and you just can't believe people would deliver a story like this. I remember looking at Leo and Leo looking at me, and I watched Ross turn all kinds of colors of red as he was saying. The guy's going through the board, and he said, well, first of all, he's referring to Alvin. He says, the little asshole does this. Then the little SOB runs over here. Then the little asshole will go over here and talk to his brother asshole. And he used these, and he kept saying these awful things, describing it. Now, Alvin is Ross's alter ego.
Right.
So when he got through, Leo jumped in and said, well, thank you very much. Thank you, and they left. And then Ross jumped up. I mean, there's so big. And he started screaming. He said, don't you ever, and he used he used a derogatory term, ever let him ever you come back here with a story.
Wow.
And I mean, the explosion was huge because Ross could, Ross was, as I said, a power. And I thought, what is the dumbest thing to ever say? Say, would you go in with Walt and say about Mickey? You say, now the little asshole runs around here and does it. Why would you ever do that? But they did it. It's very funny looking back. And, I'm sure Leo probably told that story many times because I don't think it's ever happened. where you talk about your main character, your lovable main character, as, the little son of a bitch runs over here. Still makes me laugh. Can't make this up.
So, needless to say, that story was not produced, I suppose.
Oh, no, it was not bought. I mean, the people come in and present a story to get it bought.
Yeah.
So when they freelance, like Chris would freelance, they don't get paid.
Right.
They come in, they're told, come in, and they weren't paid. They get paid if it's bought.
Right. Okay.
So, but they rough out, and do this. Chris got paid every time because he's really, really good. Now, maybe I may be wrong. Maybe they had a premise, and maybe they got a little bit of money based on a premise, like a partial payment. They might, because I wasn't involved in it. They might get a partial thing going, but you don't get paid, and you don't get. I mean, you really only get paid if they buy the story. It's like anywhere else.
Yeah.
So again, Chris is way up there. Those two guys are way down there. Anyway.
Now, were there other stories you remember that probably didn't get bought for whatever reason, or no?
There were a lot of stories. They didn't get. That's the funniest. There were a lot of stories. A lot of writers came in and couldn't get their stories sold. The majority of the stories were done by the story crew. I mean, Jan Green, and that's kind of rare. She, because they didn't have women writing at that time, and doing, kind of a comic writing. She was really good. A guy named Ed Noffsiger.
Oh, yeah.
And now, he used to drive up from Laguna to North Hollywood.
Yeah.
That's 2 hours, no freeways, or maybe it was more.
Yeah.
Work and then drive home and then come back. He spent most of the time on the road.
Wow.
Great New Yorker cartoonist.
Okay.
And great with animals. So you had Ed and Jan, and then, as I said, you had the great Cal Howard, and obviously T. was beyond. I mean, T. was, he was very elegant and he's just so classy. And you have Dick Shaw, and Dick was funny because Dick would come in, and he came in from Newport, near Balboa, and he and Virgil Parch, if you don't know, were buddies. That was Vip.
Gag
and
yeah.
They did. I mean, they were just two crazy drunks. I mean, he he came in late one day, and he said, and we said, what? He said he couldn't find his car because they went drinking and they forgot at what bar they left the car. And so what they used to do, down in Newport Bay, we're talking about L.A. Or Orange County. It was a very upper class, lots, mainly white people, lots of blonde people, and they had these yachts and small sailboats and stuff, and they would have this parade when they go around, one following another, and they just hated what happened is, of course, Dick and Virgil Parch, they owned a tugboat, a dirty, dirty tugboat called the Michigan, and they would take that out, and they'd make a drinking party, with a bunch of drunks on it, and girls in bikinis and stuff, and they would get in line with all these really elegant boats, and just irritate the shit out of them, and make noise and throw beer cans and stuff. So that's the kind of guy that Dick was, and so Dick would come in, and he would say, we're all on, we got to get these stories out. And Dick comes in and he says, I'm going to go, I need to buy a tie. I don't know why, but he says, I need to go buy a tie. And further down the road is the May Company. He says, I'm going to go buy a tie. I'll be back. We didn't see him for 4 days.
Wow.
It was that kind of stuff. Oh. And I remember he came in, and he was just kind of, he had a mustache, and he was kind of a guy that things happened to. So, and Joe Syracuse can probably tell the story, or confirm it, but he came in, and he had I'm trying to say, what is it, what kind of coat, but they had that, at that time, I'm trying to think, it's a kind of a funny weave. I can't think of what it is, but it was in on the clothes. But he had a spot on his coat. It was like colored coat, and so he went in to where the editorial was, and he got some acetone, which is kind of like a cleaner, and he put it on a rag, and he put it on the spot. And, of course, all the fibers just opened up. It opened up like a big hole. And left it while the editors were watching this hole. And he was watching it, so he came back. And he came back to a room, and he had this big, when he had a spot, now he had a bigger hole in his material. It's just, it was fun. We did a thing where Leo Salkin drove I think it was an Austin Healey. I'm not sure. It was an English car. And Leo was a very pale person, so he didn't like to have this. He didn't want to see the sun. He just hated the sun. So when he worked in London, he loved it because the sun came out for one day. So he had this car, and he never washed it. It was like, I think either dark brown, or who knows what color it was, but it was dirty. And he had the top up all the time. And because we were just like 2 doors down from the regular building, he would park his car where our office was, with just us 4 writers. So Cal Howard thought, let's polish his car, but with shoe polish. So Dick Shaw, Cal, and we went there, and we only polished half the car that faced out in shoe polish. He was too dignified, and he sat there and said, I'm not doing this. he stayed in the room writing stories. We spent 2 hours putting Cordova Brown shoe polish on, because eventually he was going to have to wash his car.
Right.
And we polished his car, and then we waited. Little kids, we waited, and I think whatever, it was like 5 o'clock. He's going to get his car, and he sees his car, and then we come out, and he starts laughing. because he just took it. He just took it really well. Because if somebody polished your car with shoe polish,
what did he do?
It was good times there. There was. Wait a minute. I don't want to take this call. Just a second. See.
Okay. I like your ring. I like your ring.
Wait a minute. But there was things like, there was a guy named Vern Jorgensen who was a really fine artist who had come over to animation, and he was good friends with Alan Zasloff, and he was Scandinavian. He was always so proud of being Scandinavian, but he was just this outgoing, very funny guy, and so I made a joke where I always would, and I would address him as, he was one of the finest minds of the 12th century. And we'd all laugh because he was always the Vikings rule. He was into Vikings. He was into this, and it's just we did things like we went down to Mexico together. Alan Zasloff, Vern Jorgensen, and I. Trying to think. Frank Braxton was great. There's a guy named Ray Aragon, marvelous artist. I don't know who else. I mean, there's just Rosemary O'Connor, and I have a story about Rosemary O'Connor.
Okay.
If you got more time, or are you running out of time?
I'm fine for now.
I tell you what happened was, it's an interesting story. I think the budgets were going over, and so Herb decided to he had this big meeting with all the writers, and he said, we're spending too much money. We've got to find a way to write a less expensive story. Yeah, and so the writers, I remember, they go, and I'm looking at it thinking, what can I do? I'm thinking, I'm into it, her about how can we help them. The other writers go, I remember when the meeting's over, and they go, fucking bullshit. Who gives a crap? They all walked away mad, and like, what do you mean write a cheap story? But I thought, wait a minute, I think I can do this. So I took a musical. I took one of the musical numbers, and I started it, and what I did, I can't remember what the song was. I don't remember. It's Oh Susanna or some kind of thing like that. And Alvin is drawing on the floor, and somebody says something, maybe, David Seville says something, and we go into Alvin's drawings, which are kids' drawings, which I designed it with my left hand. A bunch of very simple kids' drawings. We didn't have to. We barely animated them, but it was a style.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be a really great short. It was used in the Emmy Awards for the opening titles of the kids' drawings movement. And at that time, they didn't do that. Hadn't been done, or if it was not done very often of animating kids' drawings. So a couple of years pass, and I get the mumps as an adult, which is so I'm ending up watching TV, and there's a company called The Funny Farmer, either the show or whatever, and I'm watching it, and this style comes out in these kids' drawings, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, shit, that looks like my stuff, but I have nothing to do with this. And I mean, it's not like I own the world of kid drawings. That doesn't happen. So I'm thinking, God, that's strange. So I look for the credits, and I see Rosemary O'Connor, who was background and layout on Alvin the Chipmunk. And I'm thinking, at some point when I see her, I'm going to ask her. So a few weeks go by, and I happen to see her at some event. And I said, Rosemary, I got to tell you something. I'm feeling kind of like I'm going crazy. She says, oh, Bob, I was afraid you were going to catch it. I said, what? And she said, the company loved what I'd done for Alvin the Chipmunk. And since she had been the layout I had forgot she had laid out my drawings.
Mm-hmm.
They asked her to duplicate my style for one of their shows, one of their things, and she did it. And then I said, okay. And then I told her, and she says, she was apologizing. I said, it's okay, because I thought I was going crazy. Like, I own this and I own that. And I says, no, because she's really a sweet person. And it's just that I didn't want to think like, hey, that's mine. But it was a funny story. But it came out of, Herb, when he had a problem, would try to get the crew, a whole bunch of artists, to help.
Mm-hmm.
And it says a lot for Herb that he wanted to do it. And I felt really good because that was one cheap film that we did that really did well.
Yeah, I think I remember that one. Because it was very...
Yeah, I think I only did it once on the show.
Yeah, it was very different.
I might have done it twice, but I think I only did it once.
Yeah. One thing I didn't ask you, and you may not know this, but I jumped to the Lone Ranger, and you said you didn't work there. But I know between those two series, Alvin Show and Lone Ranger, DePatie-Freleng outsourced the Roadrunners and the Looney Tunes to format. You didn't work on any of those, did you?
No.
Okay.
No, I knew. I had seen when they did some Roadrunner.
Yeah.
That was done.
Yeah.
That was horrendous.
Oh, they're awful.
But
I was just curious if you know anything about that. I mean, how that happened.
No, all I know.
Why did Frizz dump him over there? Was it because he never did Roadrunner in the Warner Brothers days, or what? Is there a reason?
I think they're just cheap because at the time, Rudy LaRiva had worked at Warner's. Mm-hmm. He knew that. Yeah. I mean, so they had him as a director. I don't know if it's a budget. I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. But those things... I was a good friend with Chuck Jones. Mm-hmm. And I loved the Roadrunners. And we would talk philosophically, Chuck and I, about Roadrunner and stuff. So, Roadrunner is all about timing.
Yeah.
It's like it's so important on the timing, and that had no timing, much less drawn horribly. It was just, that was atrocious. I didn't know anything about it. I was long gone. Mm-hmm. I never got to talk to anybody about it other than I hated it when I saw it on the air. And I thought, well, they've fallen. And pretty much all the people that had been the crew of Alvin, they're all gone. Mm-hmm. Very few people stayed on.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think the only name I saw looking at IMDb that was on everything was like Joe Syracuse again. So
Oh yeah, well Joe's Joe's history, right?
Yes, Spike Jones and everything.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll tell you how great Joe Syracuse is. I mean, just at the time we were doing Alvin the Chipmunk, he had a small restaurant that he was trying to start on Ventura Boulevard down the street. Mm-hmm. And this is before the show, which came on, and I'm this young kid, and I really look young. I mean, I'm young, and then I look really young. Mm-hmm. And I was just starting out, and Joe came over to me. I mean, I started, I kind of knew him, but I was just, I think I'd only been there about a month, maybe 6 weeks. He took me out to lunch, and he just talked to me like an adult, which, he did. And he talked, I thought the world of him. How can I say, he made me feel like I belonged. Mm-hmm. When I was still so young and not belonging. This was before the show. So Joe's always been, I mean, he's one of the most caring, open people. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's just a wonderful, wonderful guy and an amazing talent. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of people came out of Spike Jones who became editorial. Roger, I'm trying to think of his name. Roger, but he became anyway.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Donnelly, something like that. And he worked over at Jay Ward. Oh, it's terrible because he became my track reader for about 15 years when I had a company. Roger Donnelly. I think it's Roger Donnelly. And Roger, I mean, so good, he wouldn't charge me because he liked working for me. Now that's a good guy. He said, no, I can do it real quick. It's just commercials. Let's see. Wait a second. I mean, there's so many good people, but they had Ambi Pawawala, if I say his name right. Ambi was one of the great animators and certifiably crazy.
Yeah.
He would talk to himself. People, they had to put him a desk far away because he had these conversations with himself.
Wow.
He was one of these great artists that people, when they did it, they had to find where to put him in a room. You can't make this up. I mean, this is you got a great guy, and he was really intense when he talked too, and he'd come out, and you almost were afraid to say, nice weather today, because you knew what he would go into. I mean, he was a good guy, but it was like he had his own sort of demons, but he was so talented. I mean, he worked in the business forever and all over the place, and you may want to look at a great character.
Okay.
I'm not saying bad things about him. This is just who he is.
Well, yeah, I mean, doing like all these different animation books, there are eccentric personalities. Like I think John Dunn was very eccentric. All his little doodles all over everything, But I mean, yeah, great artist, But
yeah, well, that's what you expect. I mean, I always figure that I was like when I went to art school, and also when I had a studio, I always had we were like damaged souls.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't fit into regular society, and I love it. I love it. You find a place because I mean, there's something. I loved it being in art school. I love working with animation people, and you don't expect them to be the norm.
Right.
I mean, there's so few. There's so few bad people. I mean, they're all good people. That's what's really, I love the people in animation.
Right.
I mean, it's just a great group.
Tell me a little bit more about Herb, since it was his company, or I guess Herb and Jules. I mean, are they like the main people at Format?
Yeah, but Jules wasn't that main. Jules was a minor owner.
Okay, so it was really Herb's thing. Yeah,
it was Herb.
Okay.
Herb was it, though. He consulted with Jules a lot. And what's kind of interesting about Jules, Jules thought he was a story man. And so he would be in meetings and he would try to say something about a story or do stuff. Nobody listened to him. I mean, we have this thing, like later he became a teacher at Cal Arts, and he did experimental films. And, and his experimental films are very interesting. And he was a great painter at UPA, and he was a good painter on Alvin. They had other, great painters, but he was the lead for setting style and stuff. But he was sort of just put up with, and was very funny later on when you find, the legendary Jules Engel. Well, he wasn't legendary during the Alvin and the Chipmunks show. He just wasn't that much. I remember once we were in a story meeting, and again, no one listens to Jules, but Jules wants to get up and do things. He wants to explain something, so he gets up. I think Alan probably remembers. And he walks over. He wants the little character, one of the characters, to kick. And he walks up to the wall, and he kicks the wall, and his foot goes through the wall board. It goes right through. And and Herb starts choking on his cigar, which he doesn't smoke, he just chews. Oh. He starts choking on his cigar because the building's rented.
Oh.
We don't own the building. And he just made a huge hole in the wall. Everybody laughed. I remember Alan Zaslav laughing the most. You know, it's just, and it's just, it was, Jules was not held in great awe as he was later, both by his students and other people and stuff.
Right.
But Herb was very, very highly respected. Mm-hmm. But Herb was into everything. He would move down the hall. He would move almost like a fast skirt running. And then there was Henry. Did anybody mention Henrietta Jordan or Hank Jordan?
No.
Oh, that was fucking wonderful. She was redhead. That was Herb's secretary. She doesn't get credit. And she was like, she just had a sailor's mouth. And she just talked really rough. And she said, no, you can't see him, like that. And she would, you'd be doing something, and then we had a big intercom. And she would say, she'd come on the intercom, and she'd say, Herb, get your ass back here in the office. And he'd turn around, and he'd go, you couldn't, and every once in a while she'd be doing like, okay, Herb, where are you? We're trying to get you on the phone. And there used to be these crazy announcements coming from Hank. And it's very funny. When I left Disney, I had a week to pack up the film, and I got a job with TV Spots. And Teehee told me, he said, I made an appointment with you with Herb Klin. I said, oh, no. And I said, I got a job. He says, no, you got to see him Friday afternoon. Now, I had seen Herb when I was in school. A wonderful teacher, Don Graham, a master draftsman, said, and teacher, one of the great ones, and he taught at Disney. He's just, legendary. And he had said, because I had 2 offers at Disney, and I accepted Teehee's offering. He said, go see as many studios as you can, because when you're working, you can't see studios. So I went to UPA. I finally won. And when I went to UPA, Herb came in. He was smoking at that time. And he came, and I had almost cardboard portfolios. He opened it about 6 or 8 inches, and he kept flicking his cigar in my artwork. And I'm standing there, and he's going, and he's flipping real quick, this stuff, and I'm going, I think he's going to set my whole portfolio on fire. and there's a lot of glass in UPA, and there was a guy that went by who I knew from Chenard, and he says, and he turns to me and says, you willing to be a flunky like that guy? And I know him. That guy's walking by with a rubber, a cement jar. And I said, yeah. He says, okay. And that was it. Worst interview I ever had. So T says, you got to go see him. And I said, I don't want to see him.
I don't blame you.
You're going to go see him. So I go there, and Hank Jordan is there. And I come and I say, I have a meeting with Herb Klin. She says, you can't see him, she yells at me. In this raspy voice. And I hear from the other room, let him in. So she says, okay. So I open the door, and he's laying on the couch. And he has had a heart attack since I last saw him in 1 year. So he goes, come in. So I come in now, because I was at Disney, and T warned me not to take my work with me. The only thing I had was the same portfolio he had dumped his ashes in. That's all I had. And I show him my portfolio. He takes each piece out separately, and he goes, oh, And he's each one is like 20, 30 seconds. And he's doing all this, and he says, I'll hire you. And I'm there, and I say, okay, I already have a job. So I walk out, and I think, what did I just do? I mean, he was so sweet to me, and everything was so different. And so I called up the company that TV Spots, and I said, I just accepted a job at Format. And they said, that's okay. We'll wait for you if you don't like it, which was, that was so kind. So I called them up after a week because I loved working for Herb. And Herb had become a different, person. He'd softened up a bit.
Right. And
he just was, he was into everything. And one of the things, that's pretty funny stuff, but since he couldn't smoke anymore because of the heart attack, he had this like 10-inch cigar that he would stick halfway in his mouth and run around, but he didn't light it. So when you come to work, and particularly because he would come and he'd look at your, at your work before you got in, and you would find in your trash this long, wet, looked like a dog turd or a horse turd, whatever, would be there. So I would come in, and without looking at my trash, I would take the piece of paper, animation paper, and drop it, because I knew it was there. Because for some reason, he'd like to drop his cigar in my waste paper basket. And he was all this energy. He wanted to do the best. And then with Alan Zasloff was a martial artist, martial arts artist, and and at one point I was in the room with him, and Herb was so excitable, and he wanted to show what he wanted to do, so he took the pencil out of Alan's hand and started drawing on his drawing. And Alan, who's very calm, just looked up at him, took the pencil from him, and broke it in half. And he said, the next time you do it, I'm going to do that to your arm. And Herb just went, and his speedy shuffle right out the door. No comment. Good times, because Herb always meant well.
Right.
He cared about people. He may cross the line, but it's because he just cared so much.
Right.
I mean, people who know him, I think almost everybody has, because he's a boss, and, you don't always have kind words for bosses, but I think you would with this guy, because he was caring, and, he's one of us. What can I say?
Now, is it true? I heard this is that the only reason he started Format is because the situation with UPA is he was a major stockholder, and it was Steve Busisto, or however you pronounce his name, wanted him to sell.
Steve Busisto.
Busisto, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a true story. He wanted Herb to sell his stock, and he says, well, if I do, I have to start another studio. Is that a true story then?
That's probably true.
Okay.
That's probably true, because he was running the studio a year earlier when I went there. It was him. He was doing everything. He was a dynamo. In terms of, and he didn't walk. He shuffled everywhere. He's kind of heavy set. And the legs just, they're like a little blur as he goes.
Wow.
It's fucking
It sounds like an animated character.
Yeah, he was.
Oh.
It's so much fun. When I'm thinking about it, I had a great time there. I enjoyed working on it. Everybody, I learned so much. I learned how to drink there. Cal Howard used to take me out.
Yeah.
Cal Howard took me out, and Grim Natwick taught him, and also Mark Davis, how to drink. So Cal would go out, and we'd have these 2 martini lunches, which after through this one incident. I started drinking there, but and it barely got into it with Cal. And then I had to come back and present one of my stories to Ross. Mm-hmm. And I came back, and I'm drunk. I can barely stand. So I start to go through my board, and I start giggling. And I'm getting it. Ross is looking at me, and he's looking at me with kind of a smirk. He's thinking they got the kid drunk. And I'm going through and I'm thinking, I'm never going to get through this. I'm going to get canned. I mean, I'm just a fucking mess. And Ross was really sweet. He got up. He said, "Love your story." And he kind of looked at me and walked off. And that's the last time I ever drank when I work. I never drink when I work. That was a lesson I learned because it was like you got to be on your game. You know, don't go out and where can you believe? You have to lean against the wall to get the story, and to get giggles over nothing. You know, I was just like, I was fucked.
Now, did Ross ever get mad at you directly?
No.
Okay, I was just curious. Yeah.
No, he would. I've seen him get mad at a lot of things. He never got mad at me.
Oh.
I guess it's not from my point of view to say why. He loved Cal. He loved T. Mm-hmm. He loved. Pretty much. I think one time he got mad at a writer. I saw him just tear him apart. And of course, that was one of the staff writers.
Yeah.
And I've seen him get mad in the writing stuff. But our little group, our little foursome, he never got mad. He came in smiling and looking forward. He didn't come in like show me. He came in. This has got to be fun. What am I going to see next? It was.
Cool.
I mean, it's different because I've worked for a lot of people where they come in and go, their arms are folded. They're prove it to me.
Right.
He did not have that. He already, all of us, at least T, Cal, and Dick, particularly because I spent so much time as that group. We had his. We're just on the same wavelength, I mean, he was there to be entertained. I mean, sometimes, I don't remember my stories, him making changes, but he did make changes. He would say, well, can you do this or can you do that? Or he would do it. I was probably pretty fortunate. He didn't tend to do that with me. But I saw him because I was in, with so many writers, I would see him change stuff and do it because that's why he has his credits as a writer.
Right.
Because it's very,
okay.
It had to get by him.
Got it.
And Leo Salkin. So they would walk in together and as a very warm team. Okay, show us what you got. And it was a very good environment.
Wow. You mentioned TV spots. You didn't say it at the beginning of the call, so you sensed it. Did you work on anything of note at TV spots, or is that so short?
No, I never. No, they're still waiting for me.
Okay. I was just curious.
I never went there.
Okay, because the whole thing about TV spots was when I did my Total Television book again, before they went to Gamma, they did some of the King Leonardo and stuff like that at TV spots. So I was just curious if you had worked on that, but apparently not. So,
no,
okay.
I think it was Norm Gofferson, and I'm trying to remember who the other guy was. Okay. They were very friendly. Later on, I worked with them, but it's when I was doing Roger Ramjet, and they actually did layout. They came in and did layout, and I was directing. So it all switched.
It seems like all these studios kind of have a little connection here and there,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, people, go on and, I kicked around. I freelanced for about 8 or 9 years. I mean, I worked at Disney, for a little over a year, and then off and on I worked. I worked probably a year, maybe plus, at Format. I wasn't there that long, maybe a year and a half. Okay. I'm not sure. And then everything else was freelance for a long time until I started my company. I worked at a place called Film Fair. And that was the longest I ever worked anywhere. I worked 3 years.
And I've heard of Film Fair. What were they best known for?
Commercials.
Okay.
And they had me come in because they wanted to have a new look for the commercials. So they set up a special company for me called Festival Films. Okay. Because I wouldn't work. And they had this big building and it had a long corridor. It used to be a motel. And so they put the animators in these long, narrow corridors, and it was really demeaning. And at the end, you open a door, and at the end, it was like somebody, it's like opening a closet door. Oh, there's the animator, and you close the door. So at that time, I had a fairly good reputation. So Gus Jekyll, who owned the studio, wanted me. And it took about 6 months of negotiations before I would go in. And I said, I won't work in your building. I had such a... And he said, well, we have a building down the street. And they showed me. I said, and it was a house. And the back was really nice. And they bought me furniture. And, I mean, they furnished it for me. It was crazy. And so I started doing... Because they were doing mainly Leo Burnett stuff. And so I started doing stuff that was much, much different. Except I created the Keebler Elf, campaign for him. But I did stuff that went into international awards and things like that. I was using different artists. We were trying to cut new ground. So that's when I was there. And then I also did live action there when I was there.
I have one more question, at least.
Sure.
But this is kind of out of left field, but it's still animation. But, I mean, we're talking totally about format. But I'm doing commentary on some Pink Panthers coming up. And I think didn't you write Dial P for Pink?
Sounds familiar.
Okay.
Probably. I never put the titles. I mean,
okay, because I was going to say, do you have any memories of
the titles? That's the weirdest thing. You didn't write titles.
Okay.
They would write, but that sounds familiar, so I think I did it.
I think it was like a spy one, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that one.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Dial Pink or whatever. I mean, when I see the titles, they don't mean anything because I never. Yeah. They're puns, and I hate puns, so it wouldn't be me.
Okay. But the only reason why is I'm planning to do a commentary if you remembered it, but I might ask you a separate time if I'm not going to record it.
I could look at it and I could tell you.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it's me.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you can check on the credit or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think I saw that on IMDb, and I go, hey, that's one I might do a recording on. Yeah, so it's like, so I was just going to ask you.
Yeah. No. Again, I said, hey, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, but that does make sense. It's like, I don't know the title. I didn't write the title. And they go, oh, yeah. So I'd have to give you a description of what it was about.
With Frizz, and I probably told you, I'd have to come up you write a story in 2 weeks, and then you're exhausted, and you have to tell them on Monday what your new one was. So I remember the one I came and I said cybernetics. And that threw him. Of course, like Yosemite said, what's cybernetics? I said a talking weight and fortune machine. Okay. Which I know I had a lot of fun with that one.
Yes.
But I would find it, because that's all. It was stupid for me to say cybernetics. Because why would Yosemite Sam know what cybernetics was? Just. I worked for a lot of good characters, and as I told you before, I love Frizz.
Yes.
It was difficult to work for, but I loved him.
That's pretty much what everybody said. I don't think anybody, but it's funny, and I kept it in the book. Did I give you a copy of the book? I forgot. If I didn't, I'll send you one.
Go ahead. I think I have it, but hey, I can always use two. Go ahead.
Anyway, but it's like about 10 different people that I interviewed said, oh, Frizz was a sweetheart, but he was just like Yosemite Sam. And I decided to leave everybody who said that. So if you read through the book...
I did it because I didn't realize it. Nobody had ever said it before to me.
Yeah.
And then after my experiences, I'm going, this is great. It's Yosemite Sam.
Yeah, but everybody else said it too, and it's like people who didn't even work together, that worked at different eras at DePatie-Freleng, since they're around for 20 years or so. It's like, they'd say, yeah, it's Yosemite Sam.
So, it was.
Yeah.
He was, he'd blow up.
Because I met him when he was very elderly, and he was very calm and relaxed. So it's like, I go, I guess this is Yosemite Sam, but I really liked and was thrilled to meet him. But like I said,
well, he was explosive.
Yeah.
And he loved to put down his own artists. And I remember at his funeral, I was sitting next to Chuck Jones, and some CBS executive, they had three people talk, and they had some executive say, "Oh, Friz Freleng is one of the sweetest men I've ever met. He was so charming and sweet." I turned to Chuck and I said, "Do you recognize this guy? Do you recognize who they're talking about?" And he says, "No, I haven't got him." No, I don't. I have no idea who that is they're talking about. Because, it was so far, when someone passes away, they're the sweetest.
Yeah, exactly.
Never stepped on a dog or whatever. And it was like, it wasn't honest. I mean, and also a CBS executive speak at your funeral.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
How come Chuck didn't speak? I don't know. It's like, I don't know how well did Chuck and Friz get along? I mean, I never.
They didn't.
Okay.
They didn't
Okay.
No. Friz used to like to refer to Chuck as, what's his name?
Because I know, kind of like, as they got to be the elder statesmen of Looney Tunes, they always kind of gave the impression that they palled around together, but it's like,
no, they didn't. They really didn't. They were they didn't get along. They weren't close, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But they would get together.
Yeah.
There was a respect there.
Yeah.
But I don't think they were ever close.
Right.
I could be wrong, but I don't think they were ever close. And certainly, he was very jealous of Chuck when I was working for him. So, because Chuck was still going strong, doing, specials and that. And Chuck got, was like because he could speak so well. He was easy to interview and do things. And Chuck loved, promoting everything he worked on. Friz was not necessarily a good spokesman for himself.
Yeah.
He, as a public speaker, Chuck was great.
Yeah.
He's one of the few people who can actually, in animation, who can talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've seen many interviews with both of them, and I know what you mean. It's like Friz is kind of a matter of fact, saying, "Yeah, I worked on these cartoons," and Chuck is like more, "Hey, this is a great thing I worked on."
Yeah, and it would be a rare interview where he didn't bring in Mark Twain. Anyway, listen, I have got to go, but you're welcome to call back because we've gone a while.
Yeah, I think I got the main gist of everything. That's why I'm going off on a tangent now. So it's like, that if I'm not talking about Alvin show anymore. Okay. I think I got what I really need. Definitely, I'll call you if I need any more or if I need clarification on something.
Well, I know a lot of people there, and again, and I can support if. I'm trying to think. Oh, the editor. I just blanked out on his name. I'm talking too long.
Joe?
I'm sorry, what?
You mean Joe?
Yeah. Joe. I blanked out. Because, Joe, he talks to me. We talk about 3 or 4 times a year on the phone.
Oh, okay.
And he's always he calls on all the great occasions. He's so thoughtful. But if there's something that you need to verify or whatever, but he will be a good source, but it will be coming from editorial. And by the way,
yes.
He if you don't know it, he was raised, I think he was next door. I'm not sure if it's Detroit or where. They grew up together as teenagers.
Who?
Herb Clinton.
Oh,
Joe
I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Well, I'll ask.
I mean, they knew each other as kids.
Oh, okay.
Before they each went their way and then came back.
Right.
So it's fascinating and a rarity. Herb Klan and Joe Syracuse, Harry Harryhausen, and I all got our Annies at the same time.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Wow. All right. Well, I'll let you go. I really appreciate this, and
thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Mark.
And
okay, and good luck, because I think it's a good story. I think it's a good story. And Ross was really a very creative source. I mean, he was a very creative man. So.
Okay.
And I don't think he even knew. I don't even know if he could play an instrument. I'm not sure. I think he's like musically challenged, but he's like a hummer or something. I don't know what, but he was good.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I'll let you go.
All right.
So let me know at some point. If you need anything else, and good luck.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Have a good day. Okay.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Bob Kurtz, for being my special guest. Episode number 12 will be coming soon. If you'd like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help. This has been the Fun Ideas Podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2018, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much, and have a good night.